he'd had the opportunity to be more creative and expressive. You know, that seems like it sort of occurred to him too. You know, sort of like, wow, I could have done this. I could have been a writer or come up with ideas. And
Yeah.
it seems like he was discovering this about himself
I think
also.
yeah, he was just like he said, "Oh, I should have taken a short story class," And I mean, that was just like phenomenal. I mean, I just could that blew my mind, like for my grandfather to say that he wanted to take a short story class, or screenwriting class. I mean,
Mhm.
yeah, I think it was just the ways we don't allow ourselves to kind of, expand and dream that, he had been so pigeonholed in his life because he had to make so many sacrifices and he really had to do the practical thing, right? And the cautious thing um, you know, um, to meet the needs of his family and to really be responsible.
Mhm.
And I think it's just such a, I think it's such an example of the ways in which, there are so many incredibly creative people, who just don't get the opportunity to express themselves and to explore their artistic side. And that we sort of make the mistake that it's just like the sort of privileged people who get that opportunity to kind of move forward in those ways are somehow exceptional or something. But in fact, there are just so many people who have exceptional sides that just never really get to, they don't get to surface and be realized. So I
Yeah.
do think that there were things that he was discovering about himself.
One of our questions from the audience is, did you follow any of his advice? What happened? What happened to crawling at night?
So, it was a really big project, as I said. There were some, really um, famous actors attached. I had very, very prominent producers, and I had monomaniacally, worked on this project for like 4 or 5 years. And what happened is that, it was kind of like a window. I had a Guggenheim, it was a window for me to really sort of work on it intensively. And my producers, again, artistically, everything was together. And these actors were even willing to work at scale, for like no money. But it was a union film and, it still was a multi-million dollar film because it was kind of at a certain level in terms of just labor and and I was assured that they were going to raise the money and they didn't raise the money. And it was really devastating. I disconnected from those producers and tried to kind of get another team. But then I was chosen to go to the Busan Film Festival in Korea that has a big market. And I was the only American project that was selected. And it was 2008. And I was in Korea pitching the film, and the economy was crashing. And I remember seeing on the televisions and everything, literally, it was like, all of, Iceland going under, like all of the banks, and basically all of the discussions just stopped. Everyone was like, okay, we're done now. And it just became clear to me that it was just, it wasn't viable anymore. And I had to switch gears. And so that was when I made a decision. It was so devastating for me, the fact that that film didn't happen. I mean, it just almost obliterated me. I would just be in tears. I felt so like such a failure, that I wasn't able to
Mm.
make it. The first thing I did though was I needed to survive. So I really shifted gears. And it was the first time ever in my creative life, because up until that point, I had made all my films on my own through very little money, through small grants and fellowships, where I just, in a very scrappy way, made my films. And this was the first time where I really trusted these, producers, and I was let down. And so part of me made the decision, you know what, I'm never, I just need to be self-sufficient. I can't do this. I really didn't like the feature film world in terms of the people and the kind of hustle and pitching. And it was really against my sensibility. I didn't enjoy that. And also just how money oriented it was. It was just not something I was comfortable with. then I got completely let down by these famous big producers. And it was like devastating for me. And I basically made the decision. I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to, I need to be self sufficient. So that's when I shifted into teaching. And I first did some television producing and got some more professional experience. And then I got my first job at Syracuse University as a visiting professor. And I just decided, I come from a family of teachers and professors. And so that was something that was always, what I was exposed to. And I decided like, okay, I got my MFA earlier, and I was like, okay, teaching is something that I feel is valuable. I can create some stability in my life, but then I also have some time off. And really since then I went that path. So, I ended up getting a tenure. Now I'm a full professor.
Wow.
I've created my own sort of stability. And then I have certain periods off where I can make my films. And so since this period, um, because I was doing fiction, and I switched to making documentaries because I was like, okay, and most of my work now, I do everything. I shoot it, I produce it, I direct it, I edit it, I sound edit it. I do almost everything for almost no money because I don't pay myself, which is unfortunate. But again, the way that I work is, and the kinds of themes that I work on tend to be very understated, unsensational themes. So, for example, I mean, most of the films you've seen about Japanese Americans are about what? The incarceration of Japanese Americans. You don't ever see anything about like ordinary Japanese American people in contemporary life. But that is not an easy sell. You know what I mean? People, we live in a world that responds to sensationalism and to big issues. And I'm not discounting the enormity and the gravity of the incarceration, but it's not the only experience, right? And so the kind of work I do tends to be very understated. So it's very difficult to get funding, but it's the kind of work that I want to do. So I do it.
Mhm.
But anyway, so I ended up then shifting into this mode of self-sufficiency where I can kind of make my own work. I have creative control over it. I don't have to answer to anyone. It's very difficult. It's you're competing with like a huge apparatus. Even documentary now is working, and many of the projects are millions of dollars. Netflix, Amazon. I mean, you're competing with these huge entities and power structures, and it's hard. But I would prefer to work in this kind of pursue my process in a way that's comfortable for me, and not have to sort of answer to anyone, and just have real freedom. So just to kind of wrap this, the reason why this film is particularly powerful for me, it's not just a personal document, but it's also a vindication, because it was kind of like through the ashes of what felt like such a failure came this film, in this unexpected way. And I think it's a reminder how the artistic process is, it's often not linear, it's digressive. And, it's like you think it's one thing and it's another. And that out of what seemed like such a huge failure, this film arose. And honestly, this for me is a more powerful film in the sort of spectrum of things than that other fiction feature film. I mean, I wish I had had the opportunity to make it, but this is a more important film for me personally. So it
Mhm.
became a kind of creative vindication too.
Yeah. Well, congratulations to you. And I hope you'll keep that script on the shelf because it does seem like Japanese American stories or stories that weren't considered mainstream or marketable. I think are being paid more attention to now. So don't give up. I think we can. I think we'll all want to see it. So because we've heard so much about it and we want to see how much you incorporate your grandpa's ideas. So anyway, we'll just keep our fingers crossed about that. Um, another question we have is, and this is to kind of do sort of a follow up to the film. How long was your grandfather able to stay independent living in his house? And did he ever find a companion to help him like he thought?
So yeah, I mean, he came up, he was very soon after my grandmother died, he was thinking about the companion. And no, he did not find a companion. Um, he was too busy, as you saw in terms of his daily rituals. And it's funny because, in a lot of ways, I really enjoyed his pace of life, and I found it, I really enjoyed living with him for those couple of months because I like to just kind of putter around too. And he really was extremely busy. I think it's a reminder of how, like, in this little world, I mean, he just had all of his rituals that he did, and they were done with a great sense of focus and thoroughness. Everything, as you see, even like going through the coupons and,
Yes.
everything was done with great intensity and purpose. And so he was busy, and so he never found a companion, and he really lived independently up until I think he was only in hospice for about maybe 4 months. And he was very, maybe 4 to 6 months. And, up until that point, he was still living very, very independently. He cooked for himself, he did all of his own cleaning, he did everything for himself. I mean, my
Yeah.
father would sort of stop in some, but he was very independent.
Yeah, I do want to talk about some of the other members of your family a bit. Like, where were your parents while you were doing this with your grandparents?
Well, my father, they're divorced, so my mother was in Massachusetts. My father was in Honolulu, but they had a very strained relationship, my father and my grandfather.
Mhm.
And so my father interacted with him some, but they were not close, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And I think, you see with my grandfather, I mean, one of the things that was so fascinating is, first of all, I came to understand much more about his limitations emotionally because of his background. And I didn't understand that. I didn't know like how tragically he had lost his mother and how alone he was. And, that the idea that one, there are these kind of key moments that are indelible, right, in people's minds, and that memory of being all alone while all the other kids were called in and he had nowhere to go and he had no mother
Yeah.
to take care of him. And there was this man, that he refers to, this bachelor man, because his father worked at a white country club as a cook, you know, and this Japanese bachelor man, because he was the groundskeeper, had a lot of autonomy. And so my grandfather would just accompany him. This guy kind of took care of him while his father was working. And he was indebted to him. And I guess that was a big regret because this man went back to Japan and he was never able to sort of thank him for what he had done. But he
Mm.
felt so abandoned and lonely, not having this mother to call him in for his dinner and to give him a bath. And he repeated that story again and again, you know.
Mhm.
But the fact that emotionally he was really limited, which was, one of the reasons why his relationship with my grandmother was very difficult. My grandmother came from a family where she was really loved, and she had loving parents. Her father was very loving to her, her mother. Whereas my grandfather just didn't have examples of that. And so, one of the things that's so fascinating, I think, is that in his imaginative world, he's so romantic, right? He's so
Yeah.
sentimental. All of his ideas are really sentimental, but he's so incapable of expressing that in his real life. Um, and even, it's funny that scene because it mimics the sort of the version of the script that he has. You know how in his version of the script, Marianne attacks, like
Right. Right.
Koji, and tumbles down, and kisses him, and like, it's a happy ending, right? And he's
Mhm.
a stoic, serious Japanese guy. And then the scene with me saying goodbye to him, and
Right. Right.
I embrace him, and I'm kind of like smothering him, and he's like, "Oh yeah, 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 okay, you get to work, and it's kind of like the exact same situation."
Mhm.
And so that's one of the things that's so interesting, is the way that not only does he project a lot of things, his concerns about his own life into this dramatic script, but that there are even some of these other kinds of parallels that emerge.
Yep. Like I said, layers in this film. I was also thinking while you were talking that, um, you know, being he must have felt on some level abandoned by his wife, right? In the way that he lost his mother and now he lost his wife. So he lost two women who couldn't take care of him anymore. And so he sort of fixated on finding another woman who could take care of him in a way. Um, but that it does I do want to talk a bit about your grandmother because I feel like we all wished we could get to know her a little bit better in this film. Um, but were your grandparents social? Because it seemed like besides you, your grandfather didn't really seem to have anybody. He didn't seem to have friends who he hung out with or a social circle. So, did he lose that social circle when your
Yeah, I mean,
grandmother
he was
passed?
actually very social, and they both were social, but he was even more social. And I think he's an example of a person who, again, that schism between his public self versus his private self, where he was a very severe person to a lot of his immediate family, you know. To the grandkids it was different, right? But to his own children and to his wife, he was, very harsh in many circumstances. But to the public, he was just, always ingratiated himself, and he was very charming. And, that was a survival mechanism, because that was like how he had to survive. Like, strangers were taking care of him, like at the golf course, right? So he had to learn how to sort of, get sort of other people to help him, and to like him and everything. So he had a lot of friends. He was, he golfed until very, very late into his life. He had a lot of friends. They would do this really funny thing, because it was a public course, Alawai, and it was, very, very cheap, but you had to like call from like 2 a.m. and keep calling and calling, and they would have shifts, and all the guys would be like calling, and then they'd take shifts, and then one would sleep in the car, like at the course. I mean, it was such a complicated thing so that they could play every day.
Mhm.
And it was so cheap, and they would just power through the course, and then they'd have coffee together, and he used to do ballroom dancing. My grandmother ended up going with him eventually, because apparently women were flirting with him, at the school. So he was very outgoing. He always wanted to do, as he indicates, like when he's saying, "Oh, we're traveling," and grandma just falls asleep, and he was actually more outgoing, and he had a lot of friends, but they all died. I mean, he was 95 years old when he died. So almost everyone had died, by
Mm.
this period in his life.
Yeah.
But they
Yeah.
used to go out a lot, and they used to entertain a lot. And, my grandmother was a very beautiful woman. And so she would always get dressed up, and, they were very social.
Yeah, I I mean, if we wished we could have seen more of your grandma. Did you wish you had more footage of her, or
Well,
how did that?
one of the things that a lot of times people ask me is, the fact that it's non-chronological, right? And one of the things that I think is so important about this film is the idea that we all sort of construct different narratives and stories of our lives that are constantly shifting, and they're not fixed, and they're certainly not definitive, right? And just like the script, the narrative is in process and is being written, so are the stories of our lives, right? So we always take the sort of protagonist, viewpoint as a given. And in this film, it's revised and contradicted, and it changes. And I thought it was very interesting, the idea of how the picture he paints of my grandmother is
Absolutely.
initially of this completely boring,
Right.
like, dud, right? Like,
Right.
she's just like, has no interest. She's just like, the way he describes her, you would just think, and if you didn't see that footage, that's what you would have thought she was, right?
Right.
And so I like that idea of, that you as an audience kind of construct a very particular idea, and then it gets challenged and, overturned, right? And then you realize like none of these sort of narratives are completely fixed. They're changing. And he doesn't mean to contradict himself, but he's in a very different position in his life and he's thinking differently about her. And, you know, but I thought it was very interesting to have the audience kind of think they know her and then look at who she is. Here's the person. And obviously it's still edited. That's one, you're only seeing a certain moments with her. But for me, I captured the spirit of my grandmother as I knew her and saw her. And as you can see, she's totally vivacious and she's fun and she's beautiful and she's, charming and everything. Um, but I really hadn't filmed that, that the footage is again from that earlier period, and I really hadn't, filmed them much. But I was so happy to kind of have those moments with her, and just again that idea of the meeting between them, right, and how she tells a
Yes.
very different version of that story, and I believe her version of the story. and and then those little beautiful moments. I mean, that moment where she picks the flower, that's in black and white, and she smells the flower. That's so indicative of my grandmother, because she was just
Yes.
this person who, I used to go on walks with her around Kapiolani Park, if any of you guys are familiar with Hawaii, because they lived right by the park. And we used to go walking, and she would say to me, she'd often stumble because she was looking up into the sky. And she'd say, Kimi, why don't you look up into the sky? Because I would be looking down at the ground, and it was so like apt in the sense of me kind of being more worried and sort of, and my grandmother was just kind of like dreaming, and, she was so optimistic. But that her smelling the flower, it just really sums up the kind of beauty of her and her sort of, that she was someone who was always smelling the flowers and seeing their beauty.
Yeah. That does come through very strongly in your film. So even though she doesn't have the footage, the amount of footage that your grandfather has, I think her personality comes through like gangbusters, and it is really like striking how he tells the story and then we meet her. Like you go back 2 years and we meet her, and it's like, this doesn't look like a woman who just falls asleep in a movie theater and that's it. So
Well, she
um
probably did, fall asleep in the movie theater. But, and that's what I mean. She wasn't curious in that way, and she was tired, because she
yeah.
worked really, really hard. I mean, my grandmother was a maid when she was a young, woman. She didn't get to go to school. She stopped at 8th grade. She was a maid. And then she became basically a sweatshop worker, you
Yeah.
know.
Wow.
And that's what she did. I mean, she would go to this place like looking beautiful, and they turned, she was a model for this place as well, but basically she was working in a sweatshop, you know.
Mhm.
And so she was tired, and but and she just didn't have, she didn't, she wasn't curious about those kinds of things in terms of watching films or reading books, even though, like, again, I had never seen my grandfather ever read a book other than, reading the paper, reading National Geographic, those kinds of things. But he
Mhm.
definitely had a different kind of curiosity.
So I want to switch over to talk a little bit about the production of the film and just the way you composed it. Um, a couple of audience members have asked about your use of what I'm going to call pillow shots, where you seem to cut away at regular intervals from your grandfather to shots of the bay or of other parts of nature. And so is that sort of a feature of your style, or did you have something narrative that you wanted to say about that with that?
Well, I think that there are sort of reoccurring, motifs in my work. And I think I often do sort of look at environment and landscape. Now, in this particular film, one of the things that I found so fascinating is that my grandfather sort of exists as an island unto himself. Like his whole home is just this insular island, and there's a lot of variety in this space, but it all takes place in this very contained world because that is his life at this point, in his 90s. But it's a very complex world, as you can see. There's so many different spaces and facets of it. But it kind of becomes this metaphor. It's like he's this island unto himself, but he is living on the island of Oahu, which is one of the most beautiful places in the world. And usually we think of representations of Hawaii in that way. You're seeing the average life of someone, right? And their world. But I think it's very important to also reference the environment because he was also shaped by that environment. He was brought up on this beautiful island. So again, it metaphorically, it's kind of reinforcing this idea of sort of the island, and the multiple kind of versions of the island. But then on a structural level, it's those landscapes are providing visual respite because we are in a very kind of claustrophobic space and we need some escape and release. But rhythmically, they're also working as moments of pause, and meditation, because it allows you the time to kind of just absorb what you've seen. Because I structure films, in a very particular way so that they have a very particular accumulative impact. They work slowly to sort of build in a certain way. And it's very important to me that the audience has some time to reflect on what they've seen. So those serve a very important rhythmic and structural function in the film.
Thanks. So I want to just shift gears for a little bit. And then I think what I'd like to do in the time we have left is we still have questions, but I might want open it up to the audience to just kind of ask you questions themselves, because there are a lot of there's a lot of commentary in the chat. And so I think people should
Yeah, and
just
I'm so sorry because I can't really, I want to focus on
yeah.
this, so I can't really read it. So it'd be better if people
Oh,
just ask
yeah,
me.
tell me about it. I've been trying to like read out of my right eye while I'm looking at you with my left eye. But so I think I can open it up to the audience to let you know how much they love this film, and to maybe ask some other specific questions. But I do want to close with my last question, which is to ask, what are you working on now?
I am working on several pieces shot in Laos and Cambodia, actually. And so a lot of my films deal with different kinds of cross-cultural themes, and I'm really interested sort of in the meeting point when people from very different worlds kind of come together and sort of search for some mode of connection. And a lot of, my films kind of emerge from travel. And so there's been a focus on different aspects of tourism as well. I want to put in the chat because I'm going to just put in the chat. There's two different things too. I mean, this particular film, 95 and 6 to Go, and another film of mine that was shot in Uganda, which is referenced in the film. You know how he says, "Oh, what
Yep.
about that one in Uganda?"
Yep.
And I say, "Oh, I finished that one."
Yep.
They just got released on Canopy through the public library.
Okay, so Where Are You Taking Me is on Canopy?
Yeah, and 95 and 6 to Go
Great.
just got on Canopy too. So I encourage you, if you enjoyed the film, please share it with as many people because they can all look at it now, because it's on Canopy if they're public library. I mean, a lot of public libraries have access to it. So I just put those two links into the chat. And Where Are You
Great.
Taking Me, this film in Uganda, I think you might find it quite interesting, but it's again an impressionistic kind of sensory sort of journey through Uganda, but it's also a film. So you see kind of like all these little interesting microcosms, but it's really kind of looking in a more poetic way about everyday life. So there's scenes that are on one hand very ordinary, but they're presented in, I think, an unusual way. A lot of my work is about the things that are overlooked, whether it be my grandfather or these moments in daily life that we kind of pass by, but there's like this beautiful poetry that's kind of constantly happening all around us. And so that film is very much about that, but it's also a film that raises a lot of questions about kind of the cross-cultural gaze and sort of the politics of representation. But those questions are raised, I think, in a pretty non-didactic way. But there are quite a few sort of different levels and dimensions to this film. Where are you taking me? So that you can easily watch. So the films that I'm working on now are kind of a continuation of some of those sorts of themes, but in Laos. So I'm working on one piece, which is more of a, it could be an installation too, but it's like a shorter piece, but it's a series of video portraits, just static, long takes of Laotian people who work in the tourist industry. And it's really about the sort of exchange. It's called Exchange. And it's about the sort of really the gaze that happens between me and that person. And again, I think it sort of raises a lot of complicated questions around sort of power and representation and the possibilities to sort of know or to these encounters that are full of possibility, but also fraught with a lot of limitation and complication in the process of sort of filming. And then another piece called Onlookers, which is an observational documentary that again is a very formal film in terms of these tableaus that are very, very particular, that is about tourism in Laos, but it's looking a little bit more at youth, you sort of backpacker or younger tourism, but there's also intersections with like Asian group tourism and sort of Western backpacker tourism, but you also see a lot of different aspects of Laotian daily life and the ways in which these sort of, these two sort of worlds exist in parallel and sometimes intersect. And but that film is called Onlookers. And then I'm working on a project called Tour Guide, which is about, again, tourism, but it's about atrocity tourism in Cambodia and how, it's looking at sort of tour guides who lead foreigners to these, sites of the former Khmer Rouge, right? The killing fields and these other places, and this very unusual situation of these young tour guides who are very disconnected from that history, having to sort of retell, and in a sense perform in a way that very complex history to tourists. So that's what I'm working on.
That's great. And don't you have one that takes place in Peru?
Yeah, so I have a film called Looking for Adventure that
Yeah.
again is about group tourism in Peru, and that one is going to be on Canopy in the beginning of February. So you have the
Oh,
opportunity to see a couple more. And I might be having some more kind of coming out on Canopy. But the other thing, you had mentioned this is my website, as you had mentioned. And the other thing is, if you're interested in sort of staying in touch, I have a mailing list. So I recommend that, you join the mailing list, and I can kind of keep you updated on my projects and when they're being, released, and, when you can potentially see them. So please join the mailing list.
great, great. And I'll also put out the word to everyone in our audience that if you have ideas or leads on where 95 and 6 to Go can screen, and other opportunities for that film, let me know and I can pass the word on to Kimi, or you can try to contact Kimi yourself through her website. Because again, I do think that there will be greater interest in the stories that the Japanese American community has to tell. And so if we could use your powers of storytelling to help us with that, that would be super in the future. So I'm going to open it up, but I just see in the chat that one of the questioners, Tracy, had to leave, and she had a question very specific. She lived in Hawaii, and she had a very long question about where exactly you were, or your grandfather's house is. So for the people in our audience who are from Hawaii, can you talk
Yeah.
specifically about the neighborhood?
Yeah, they're on Kapahulu, just behind Montserrat. So you see Diamond Head in the shots of his house. So they're right by Diamond Head. So it was about like 7-minute walk to Kapiolani Park, right by Waikiki. So yeah, that's the area.
Great, thanks. So I think we can go to gallery view now and just kind of open it up to the audience. And you're welcome to ask questions for Kimi or give your comments on your impressions of the film. We have a few moments, if you don't mind staying for like another few moments, Kimi.
Yeah, they did live near Leonard's. That's right. We used to get malasadas there all the time.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to open it up to the audience. You can unmute yourself, I think, and speak up if you have a question or a comment for Kimi.
Question. Hi, Kimmy. I
Hi.
love your film.
Thank you.
This was actually my second time viewing it. So,
Oh, thanks.
yeah, and so I have several questions, but because of time, I'm only going to ask one. And so that question is: there was one part of the film where your grandfather is reading the paper, and then he says, "Oh, you're going to get me in trouble." And so I was just wondering, what was the question, or what were you asking him to answer when he said that?
I mean, that's of course the scene that I was referring to,
Oh,
when he's sort of admonishing me, and there were much more serious scenes than that. Like I said, where he really was like threatening to me, and the camera would just be like, woo. And initially I had those in the film, in the cut, because I thought it was kind of interesting to see then the change that comes about at the end. But the thing is for an audience, it was so unsettling to feel that they were watching something that he had forbidden, that
mm,
it really was detrimental, to the viewing experience. So I ended up taking out some of those more severe ones. But I think it was just, I don't really remember what the question was. I don't, I think it was just more that it wasn't so much like a specific question that would really trigger it. It would just be suddenly he kind of became aware that, oh, are you going to show this to anyone? And it just
oh,
kind of clicked, and he would just switch like kind of out of the blue.
mm,
So I think that, I don't really remember what it was specifically at that moment.
mhm,
But I think that, yeah, it was just this kind of, in a way, it would just be random, a surprise of him just kind of becoming aware
yeah,
that, oh, are you going to ever show this to anyone? And again, it's a very Japanese, right? It's
yeah,
like, you don't air your dirty laundry, you don't tell anyone anything,
yeah,
you don't show any weakness to anyone.
mhm,
And it can be a very oppressive thing, right? Where you can't share anything.
mhm,
And so it was more of that kind of blanket thing of just like, you don't air your dirty laundry to anyone, and you better not do, air mine. Okay.
right, right. Okay, well, thank you. I really
You
enjoyed.
want to go ahead and ask your second question?
Okay, sure. Well, let's see. Um, you kind of answered it, but I'll go with my last question. So, how did your aunt pass away? I know it said it was an accident, but what
Mhm.
kind of accident was it? Do you know?
Oh yeah, I mean, she was killed in a car accident. So
Oh,
it was really, really tragic. My aunt was a really interesting person, because my father is and was, he was a very handsome man, and he was the boy, and
mm,
he was the oldest. My grandfather was a postal worker. My grandmother was a sweatshop worker. He went to private school from the time he was a little boy,
oh,
private school all the way.
mhm,
He went to private college. Okay. My aunt, of course, went to public schools.
mhm,
She was completely, second class
mhm,
on every level. And she repressed a lot. When she ended up, after college, she went to University of Hawaii. She moved to San Francisco, and she became like a hippie, and she was like an activist. And so my grandparents, my grandfather disowned her, and she was, disowned from the family. She ended up moving to Mexico. She became a very accomplished weaver. So you see those images of her, right, with the Mexican dress, and she's behind a loom.
Loom, yeah.
She was a very accomplished weaver and artist. Then she ended up finally coming back to Hawaii. She got a job at the University of Hawaii on the Big Island. And so she was taking this kind of practical path. She mended the relationship with my grandfather. You know, they were back on, you know, my grandmother was always very close to her. So she was like in between, right? But she was, you know, had this stable job. She was about to get married to this French astronomer who was working on the Big Island. And she was driving with a friend, and someone who was on drugs hit her and killed her. And she was 33, which is the unlucky year, you know, for Japanese. So it devastated. As you can see, that was another turning point in their relationship, because my grandmother was just heartbroken, you know. I mean, she was very close to my aunt. And you see how he says, well, you have to keep going. You know, he was a survivor. He was just all about, you persevere, you know, what are you going to do? And she didn't, you know, she really was grieving for so long.
Never recovered, huh?
Yeah, she didn't really, you know, I mean, towards the end of her life, she started to, you know, but there was a long period where she was in a very, you know, deep depression about it. And he was just kind of like, you know, we have to keep living. We have to move on. That's what happened to her.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Well, I'll let someone else ask questions.
Okay, thanks for your questions.
Anyone else?
Hi, Kimi.
Hi,
Really enjoyed your film. Thanks very much.
thank you.
You asked your grandfather a question. I forgot how you phrased it exactly. It's something like, of all the Japanese values, which one do you think is most important? And he responded right away. I thought he was going to pause and take some time to think about it. He answered like right, you know, in a split second. He said obligation.
Yeah.
And he was very emphatic about that. I was wondering how he came up with it so quickly. He must have given it a lot of thought. So I was wondering if he felt like he was obliged to others, or others were owe him at that, possibly. How did that play in his life? And who was he referring to someone in particular?
Well, I think that's a pretty common Japanese value, you know, the idea of obligation to those who have, you know, been kind to you, done something for you. And it's like what he's saying, otherwise we'd be like animals, you know, if we didn't have that sense of reciprocity, you know, which is again such a deep Japanese value. But I think that idea of obligation, that, you know, again, you are indebted to those people, you know, who were kind to you, who raised you. So whether it was that man who took care of him, you know, on the golf course, you know, the different people that that did something for him, I think he was very conscious of, you know, kind of what it takes to have opportunities in life. And there was no sense of entitlement for him. You know, there was nothing that was easy for him, right? So I think he had a very clear sense. If someone had extended themselves in some way, he had a very deep sense of kind of reciprocity, obligation back to them. And then, of course, within the family, the sense of obligation, you know, filial piety, just like you have to obey like your elders, you know. And he had a complicated relationship with his father because my great grandfather, you know, lost his job during the Depression. And I think, you know, it was really my grandfather's responsibility, you know. It's like they were going to lose their house, everything. And that's why he couldn't go to college, and he couldn't, you know. And I think he had a lot of, you know, resentment towards his father, in the sense of seeing him kind of as a weak person or failure. But at the same time, you know, he knew his obligation was to take care of his father and to sacrifice, his opportunities in order to do that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Well, I've got a second question, if I may, actually.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
More personally with you. I was wondering, being in filmmaking is probably not a traditional Asian career path.
Mhm.
More so today, but certainly when you started, how did your family take that? Were there, who was supportive and who was kind of a little bit more reserved?
Well, I think my mother's Caucasian. She's of Italian German ancestry. She grew up in Kansas. And she is now she's a retired professor. She was a high school teacher. Both of my parents were high school teachers. And then after my mom got a divorce, she went to graduate school and she got her master's and her PhD, and she became a professor with 2 kids. And she's a very optimistic person, and she's always she always had a lot of confidence in anything I did or my sister did. She just felt like, okay, I think they're capable and bright and they'll figure it out. So she just always kind of trusted that it would eventually work out, and I think too, she had it kind of in her back pocket. Like, she definitely was like, Kimi, I think it'd be good for you to get an MFA too, because that's a nice option, if you ever want to teach. But it was not like a pressure or anything like that. My grandparents and on the Japanese side were a lot more worried and cautious. And for them, I got my first teaching job at Syracuse before my grandfather died. So when I was visiting him at hospice, I was showing him my card, from Syracuse, and he was so relieved. He was like, oh, it's okay. Because and he gave me the right advice. It was true. I needed to be, it's interesting because he was such a conservative person in his own dealings with his wife, right? In the sense of hierarchy and, the wife should serve him and everything, right? But with his grandkids, he always advised us to be independent. He never, ever pressured me to get married. He didn't say anything about kids. He only emphasized that you can only rely on yourself, and he expected us to be self-sufficient and, able to take care of ourselves. So he was, he really had a lot of admiration for the teaching profession and knew that it was something that was stable and stuff. So once I went into teaching, he felt really relieved. But, it was good advice. I need, it's like right now, like the state of the economy and everything. I mean, the fact that I have this secure teaching position, is really important. And the fact that I can work on my projects with a certain kind of freedom, yeah, there's the financial limitation, but I have freedom because I'm not relying on the films to generate a huge amount of money to survive on, So it was very good advice. And as much as I kind of rolled my eyes at the time, it was very good advice.
Thank you.
Sure. Anyone else? I'm happy to answer anything. Yes, Karen.
Yes, this is a simple question, I think. There were a lot of food scenes, both visual and also you could hear him eating things. And I think that was one of the first reactions that I had was, oh, this looks good. Was there a particular maybe strategy, or I'm sure you were very conscious of putting in so many.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, he was obsessed with food. He's constantly thinking about food. Like, at breakfast, he's talking about lunch. At lunch, he's talking about dinner. At dinner, he's talking about tomorrow, what he's going to eat. He's totally obsessed with food. And because he had this kind of, a certain kind of resistance to being filmed, I really couldn't get in his way. I really had to be kind of, just not interfere with anything that he was doing, which was hard for me as a filmmaker too, because if you see some of my other work, it's even more kind of controlled aesthetically. And I had to kind of give some of that up. And in many cases, I would just kind of set up the camera and just let it go. And I always knew that's where he would be because he was constantly eating, you know? And so he was a captive person then because he couldn't move while he was eating, you know, because usually he's just sort of like busy doing all these things and didn't have time to even talk to me, right? Because he's busy. But while he was eating, he was stationary. So I would just kind of set up the camera there and I could always, you know, be assured that he was going to come back to that seat and he was going to eat. And that was a time where I could ask him certain things. So that's one of the reasons. And, you know, I do think it also does, of course, capture so much of who he is because of just how he eats, what he's eating, you know. But he was obsessed with food. Yeah. Anything else? I'm really happy to answer anything. No questions. Yes.
So can't see me because I'm here with my mom. I'm right here.
Oh, hi.
So I really like the movie, but I had a question about there was a scene when he was drinking some Pepsi, and there seemed to be something in the cup already, and it turned kind of like a milky color. Was that medicine or what was in that?
He was drinking Pepsi, prune juice, which I think is like, isn't that what soda is that? Basically, isn't that kind of like the D one?
Dr.
Anyway,
Pepper.
yeah, Dr. Pepper. I think that's kind of what Dr. Pepper is. But anyways, then he had soy milk in there.
Wow. Interesting.
But you know, he was, you know, part of what was so interesting, he was this like inventor, right? Whether it be that drink or you could see all the contraptions that he had in his house and like, you know, like when he's doing the hibachi and he's got the fan and he's doing, you know, the poles and then he's got like all of these systems and he had all these like pulleys and he create, you know, it's like the exercise thing. He was really like this inventor and he would always, of course, recycle things, you know, and they were all done with like really cheap materials. But even in terms of his, you know, meals or concoctions, so that was one of his concoctions.
Wow. Yeah, I guess it's that generation, they don't waste anything. You know, you tell that they came, you know, not from a land of plenty because they kept the beer cans and they cut them up and did stuff with it. And it's amazing.
Well, and he was so handy, as you can see. I mean, he like built everything. He painted. He'd be climbing up on the roof, you know, when he's 90 years old, and like, you know, he was so macho and tough. And just like when he's, you know, with that huge saw, right? He's like, he's, you know, building shelves, and you know, so yeah, just incredibly resourceful.
Oh, interesting. Thank you.
Sure, William.
Yeah, I was impressed by his modified push-ups that he did. Did he do that every day? I mean, I was trying to count, and he did a lot there.
Well, you know, and that's why I put the entire sequence, you know, because it right there, it establishes so much about who he is and his character and that perseverance and that grit. So, you know, you see these different, I mean, that's kind of a shot that I love. If you see some of my other work too, I really like long takes, you know, that really allow something to unfold. In this film, I had to be careful that I didn't kind of indulge in things just for aesthetics, but that if I had something that was a little more stylized like that, that it really had to reveal something very essential about him and his personality and his character. So, you know, it's an important shot because he does like 60 or 65, I don't know if it's 60 or 65, but push-ups, and, you know, then collapses, and it just, again, establishes the personality and his grit. But he would do those exercises, yeah, every day. And then you saw him also with his back, right? When he's doing the thing that he's created in his garage to straighten his back. But he was very disciplined and would do those every day.
Thank you.
Sure. Judy.
Yeah, I was just wondering what year your grandfather was born, what year he passed away.
I don't know what year he was actually born. He was 95, and then he passed away, I think, in, I don't know if it was 2011 or 2012. I think maybe 2012. So,
My in-laws are from Hawaii. So I was just wondering if they were around the same age. But
yeah, yeah. I think maybe, yeah, I don't know. I don't know, but that's, yeah, that's the general,
okay.
want to do the math.
I was just curious. We haven't watched the film yet, but
Oh, okay.
after this.
I hope you enjoy it. Yes, Alan.
Kimi, I want to say you really captured local Hawaii. You know, your environment shots, the shot of the house, the backyard, it was so Hawaii.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just really appreciate that.
Thank you so much. You know, the one person that I really want to get to, I really want to get this film to Barack Obama.
No.
I really want him to see this movie for some reason, but because, you know, the thing with Barack Obama, we have some other similarities because my mother is white and is from Kansas, and I'm biracial, and I went to Punahou, and you know, and it's like this weird little thing I have where it's like, I think he would appreciate this in terms of what you're saying about, even though his, you know, relatives aren't, even though of course he has the Asian connection, the Indonesian, but you know, it's like I would love to share this film with him. So if anyone has a connection with Barack Obama,
I have a question. What is Leonard's?
Oh, it's a bakery. It's a famous bakery. And they have those Portuguese malasadas, you know, that are the like the sugar donuts and stuff. So it's a famous local place. And, you know, there's a lot of these places have disappeared with gentrification, and it's one of the places that survived. So, yeah. It's in Kapahulu, which is the neighborhood that they lived in.
Everybody knows Leonard's. Everybody knows Malasada.
Well, Alan, not everybody's from Hawaii, okay? I was wondering, I'm from Hawaii too, and yes, I went to Punahou.
Oh, okay.
Yes, but I was wondering, what country club was it that your grandfather, you know, where the bachelor man took care of him? What country club was it?
I think it was the Oahu Country Club.
Okay.
I think that's, you know, and it's interesting because my aunt, my grandmother's sister, who is much younger, got to go to college because my grandmother, you know, because she was the eldest girl, and she sacrificed a lot so that the younger siblings could go to school. And she ended up becoming the vice president of this big painting company. I forgot what it was called. It was a big famous painting company in Hawaii. And she ended up becoming a member of the Oahu Country Club when it was very unusual still for Asians to be allowed in, because it was an all-white country club, you know, initially.
Yes.
And so it was a weird kind of turn there. But I think that's the place that he had worked.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Any last question before we wrap up?
I think
I was a little worried about the fireworks that he had in that can that was a garbage can with.
You see, that's another example of contraption. You know, the fact that he had rigged, I mean, it's great. It's amazing. It's like he had this rope, you know, and he rigged it so that all of the firecrackers would go into the trash can, you know, and so that all of the little wrappers would be in there so that he didn't have to clean it up. So he rigged this thing, you know, and I was just like, it was just me and him, and he did that, you know, because I guess he wanted to do the firecrackers because I was there. And, you know, he's got this rope and he's pulling it in. I mean, I had no idea like what was going on, but it's so funny because I don't know if you can hear him, but he's saying right after they explode, he's like, oh, now I got to clean them up, you know. Or, it's just, he's so funny. But that's another example of his kind of ingenuity, you know, in creating these different little contraptions. Is there any
Also, he
final
couldn't
question?
run.
Yeah, I certainly want to answer anything that if anyone has another, you know, important or just burning question they'd like to ask, anything, I'm happy to answer.
This is
Yes, Linda?
you know, when you're doing something like this and you have a subject that you're living with, I'm just curious, when you're filming, do you just let him go through the whole day, even though you're living with him? So you're not cooking or you're not helping him in any way because you just want to show him in his daily life? Is that how you go about it?
Yeah, my grandfather took more care of me than I took of him, honestly, because he's a better cook than I am. So, you know, I didn't really think about it in that way. Like I would, you know, and I can't say that like I was filming all of the time, but you know, I filmed a lot in the sense that I think for me, a lot of those little, you know, details and all of those rituals are important. So it's not like there's anything that's really standing out like, oh, this is the important moment, because I just found how he did everything was very interesting, but I did help out some. But
Okay.
you know, he definitely cooked more than I did and stuff, but I might like clean and cut and things like that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure. Linda, yeah.
Yeah, he ended up in it. It didn't look like skilled nursing. It looked like assisted living or, you know, some a facility. And I was just curious what that process was like and whether it was recommended to him, whether there was resistance to doing that.
He was in hospice, and honestly, he was really happy because that facility was an amazing facility that was only open to federal workers. In the sense that, or maybe it wasn't just that it was open to federal workers, but he was able to get in like with very quickly because he had been a post office worker. And one of the things that he took such pride in was because there was like a famous judge that was there too, you know, and we know how he compared himself to the other people, and he said, oh, they can't eat, they cannot go anywhere,
Yeah.
you know, and it's like, he's like, you know, he's very competitive, you know, and he felt like he was so much more capable, right? And the judge is like, you know, can't even function or eat. But the fact that he was in the same facility as a well-known Japanese American judge really meant a lot to him. And you know, he actually said to me that he was more happy then than he had ever been in his life, actually. And in a strange way, I think because he had so much fear about dying alone without any dignity, the fact that he had ended up in a place that was like with a judge made him feel like, you know, he was proud of where he was, and he felt he didn't feel abandoned because his biggest fear was that sense of kind of just being abandoned and alone. And you know, that was like the key fear that he had, of being alone. And he felt that he was in this really nice facility where these really prominent people were, and it was like all of that worry had lifted from him. And he was like, he actually said to me, like, I'm like this, I'm so happy here, this is like the happiest time of my life, you know? And then, you know, it's just like the way he's talking about the food, like, oh, and then there were peas and, you know, oh, spaghetti and macaroni, and, you know, and he enjoyed the food, you know, like he was very, very positive while he was there. So it was interesting.
And you know that place is dead.
What's that?
He wasn't muted.
Was he buried with his? I think he was asking where that was, or what's the name of that place?
Oh, you know what? I don't actually remember what it's called. It's kind of up in the mountain. But I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't remember what the facility was called.
Thank you.
I have one question, Kimmy.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know if
Well,
I've located you.
well, I
But
don't
yes.
like my picture on there, but I was
Oh,
wondering, did your grandfather ever get a chance to see the films that you made of him and what he thought about it?
well, no, because I mean, he died very soon. I mean, when he's coming up with that title, and he said, "Oh, I think I'm going to live more than 6 months," right? Because it's 95 and 6 to go. The idea that it's, 6 months to live, 6 yards to cross, the 100-yard line, right? Which is what he had come up with. So he actually died after, the doctors had given him 6 months, and, he died in like 4.5 months, from that point. And so, like I said, I hadn't even planned. I mean, it was a complete surprise that he gave me permission. I mean, it was a complete surprise to me. So he died very shortly after that. And then it was a long process of me looking at the material and considering it. And, I didn't finish the film for another 3 to 4 years, in terms of actually finishing it. So no, he never saw any of it. But he did see some of my other work. And I remember when I was in hospice with him, I showed him a fiction film that I had finished recently. And again, it was kind of one of those things like, okay, yeah, this is good, but what about that other one? Like, because I still have some titles for you, and he had so many different, I couldn't include all of them. He had so many titles,
Right.
but
So he was aware that you were making a movie of him and other people would view him later
well,
on.
he only no, I mean, like I said, I wasn't making a movie of him until he said, "What is the title of the film you're making about me?" And I was like, I don't, I didn't. I was like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm making one about you. But he said, "Well, this is what the title should be," and then, he proceeded to give me permission. So it was only at that point that I realized I could make a film.
Right. Yeah, it's too bad that he didn't see the film because he would have left this big legacy. Because I know he felt he had a lot he could contribute to, but never had the opportunity in his life to do so. So
Oh yeah,
I
I know.
thought
And
that
he
was
would have been
interesting.
the fact that he was a star in this way, I mean, I can
Yeah.
imagine him at a film festival, he would have been the star of the film festival, because it's interesting. One of the things about this film is I think there's this assumption that like young people aren't interested in older people, right? It's like, oh, no one's interested. And because, he's almost like an iconic, he's almost like an icon for a hipster, right? It's like even his style of dress and like his big hats and like young people think he's so cool, and they really think he's like, just the fact that he's so frank and unfiltered, and he would have been a huge success. Like, and I think he would have really enjoyed, some of the limelight. And it's really too bad that he didn't get
Right.
to
Yeah.
experience that.
I
Yeah.
agree because he did have a very rough life in Hawaii, not really having a family, no role models, no mother, no father. So that part was kind of sad. But
Yeah.
at least we all get to enjoy seeing your grandfather and his wife.
Mhm.
And so that part is very good. I really enjoyed it because my father was from Hawaii and had a similar background like your grandfather. So it's very poignant to me. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Kimmy, I think, we enjoyed the movie, but with your background as to what happened and what he was really about, really helped to kind of illuminate the whole kind of process here. So thank you for that.
Sure. Yeah, Alan.
I gotta say, I think it was a gift for both of you. It was a gift to him that he could, come out and show his colors and who he was, and clearly a gift to you in terms of knowing your grandfather. I think it was just a wonderful, give, get, receive.
Thank you. And I think one of the things that's nice is, like I said, with a lot of young people who've seen the film, they're often inspired to go and like call their grandparents, right? Because I think it is an example of how, you can easily miss the opportunity, right, to talk to your elders and to get to know them, and that you really have most people have such a limited sense of who their grandparents, are. And it's only in the context of kind of serving them, right, and being like nice to them and doing things for them, and not knowing that they have, lived through so many different historical moments and, experienced so many things, and are often extremely modest about what they've accomplished in their lives, right? Because they think, oh, it's not going to be of interest really to others. So one of the things that's nice about this film is I think that it kind of triggers and inspires people to think, don't waste that opportunity, right? It's like if you have the chance to talk to them, record it, to kind of collect some of these oral histories, it's just so important.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Kimi, for spending all this time with us and illuminating this film that we all loved. So thank you so much.
Sure.
And everybody, yeah, turn your video on and give some claps.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bring her back. Bring her back.
Well, I do want to mention.
I'll take a quick, let me just do a quick like screen grab here. So if everyone can like wave. Thank you.
And I will mention that Kimi's coming back.
Oh, good.
A guest appearance on our Oshogatsu celebration on January 29th, right? You're just going to make like a sort of a cameo.
Yeah, but
guest
I don't know
appearance.
if it'll be of interest to any of you guys, since you've, I think I'm just going to maybe show a little clip or something like that. So there's probably nothing too new, but if, certainly join if you'd like to.
We look forward to it.
Yeah. It's going to be a special celebration on the 29th. So I hope we'll all be there, but we can all just sort of greet each other like old friends. And thank you again. And we'll try to keep in touch and follow you. And
yeah, please, like I said, share that information, Canopy, Where Are You Taking Me, 95 and 6 to Go. And then the other film that will be coming up at the beginning of February is Looking for Adventure. And again, please join my mailing list at kimitakesue.com, and then you can keep posted about those upcoming films that I was telling you about, and I'd love to stay in touch. But thank you so much. It's been such an honor to get to share the film with you, and thank you for your comments and questions.
Thank you for sharing the video, the Vimeo link with us. So.
Sure. Take care.
Mahalo,
yeah. All right. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you,
Sure,
Kathy.
thanks.